On this episode of Long Riders Radio, we're going to find out how you can ride more than 13,000 miles on an iron butt rally and still come in 82nd place. Coming up! Support for Long Riders Radio comes from DiscountRamps.com. DiscountRamps.com offers a huge selection of power sports products for your ATV, UTV, motorcycle, and more. Everything you need to load, haul, or transport your power sports toys. Long Riders Radio listeners can save 15% off their order by using coupon code LONG. That's LONG at DiscountRamps.com. Well, hey there everyone, Justin here. Hope you're doing well. It is pouring down rain outside, so it's a great day to cut a podcast. That's what I thought, at least. On today's episode, we're going to talk with George Barnes, who won the 1999 Iron Butt Rally. As I mentioned in the teaser there, he also came in 82nd in the 2001 Iron Butt Rally, and we'll find the story for both of those coming up here in just a few minutes. I want to throw a big thank you to Dylan Spink. Dylan and I have been kind of trading emails back and forth, and he helped me make a little handle for my new auxiliary tank on the Goldwing, and that will be very, very useful in getting the bike up on the center stand. So thank you very much to Dylan. Really appreciate your help with that. And for the rest of us, sit back and relax. Enjoy this little talk with George Barnes. Well, on the line today, we have somebody who I think will be a very interesting interview, and I'm really looking forward to talking to. He is someone who has completed 4 Iron Butt rallies. He's been in 6, and he's won one of them. And most importantly, he is a Patreon subscriber to Long Riders Radio, and I thank him very much for his support. Ladies and gentlemen, George Barnes, welcome to Long Riders Radio.
Well, thanks for having me. I enjoy doing it.
So you... Well, before I ask you about that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got into riding and all that kind of stuff?
Well, my father was a motor officer for LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department, when I was a kid. Apparently, when I came along, my mother made him get out of the motor squad and transfer over into cars because at that time, motorcycles were definitely a lot more dangerous. But he never lost the bug for motorcycling. And so when I was 9 years old, he bought a Cushman Trailmaster scooter kind of thing, kind of not really a motorcycle, but and taught me to ride that. And like so many other people that you've interviewed, I just progressed from there through Honda step-throughs to Honda CLs to when I got into high school, I got a Triumph, and I started doing my quote-unquote long-distance riding when I was in high school and rode a 600-mile round-trip weekend on a Honda 350 and just about burnt that puppy up. So my dad said I needed something bigger, so we bought me a Triumph, and unfortunately it was the Tiger model. It was a single-cylinder, a single carb, and it had the hottest spark plug the Champion made, so halfway up Interstate 5, the weekend after it opened, the thing burned a hole in the piston and left me stranded on the side of the road. So, and the funny thing was I had to hitchhike almost 30 miles to find a payphone because they hadn't put any services out on the interstate yet. So
they didn't have the famous call boxes that are all throughout California.
So my parents came and got me, and then my dad decided, well, this isn't cutting it. So he had connection with the importer or the actual distributor on the West Coast for Moto Guzzi's. So I got a Moto Guzzi Eldorado, which was a former police bike, and I started going all over the country on that thing. And then I progressed from there to different Moto Guzzi's. Finally, one of my Guzzi's failed me in Arizona, and I switched over to BMWs, and I've been with them ever since. So, nice. I've been riding for 58 years now. So,
how'd you get into iron butt riding specifically?
Well, during my late 30s, I decided to go back to my dirt biking roots and joined an off-road motorcycle club and started racing dirt bikes and doing hare scrambles and hare and hounds in California. And it was really fun. I'd race every other weekend. But the problem was I was always trying to go faster and get better, so I would pretty much always fall. Crash, I guess we call it. You know, there are some people that say if you're not crashing on a dirt bike, you're just not going fast enough. And in a racing, that kind of is true. But it would take me 2 or 3 days to get back to normal where I could move again. And then a friend of mine talked to me about this thing called the Saddle Sore 1000, which was put on by a guy named Les Martin. He actually had an organization in California, and it was road bikes. And at the time, I had a Moto Guzzi that I rode on as my street bike, and so I took off and did a ride with these guys, and it was 1,000 miles in 24, documented but organized. There was a whole group of us that did it, and I got back from that, and I thought, wow, I don't have to change tires on the bike. I don't have to. I don't really have to do anything. Maybe wash it. I'm not sore. You know, I know I'm going to be able to get up and walk tomorrow, which in my dirt biking experiences wasn't always the case. So I thought this is kind of cool. And then the following year, Les put on the Bun Burner, which was 1,500 miles in 36 hours. And so I did that with my friends. And so that's when I got hooked on long distance street rides. And then my dad and I had also ridden a ride out of Los Angeles called the California 1000, which ran out of LA Harley Davidson, which back in the 70s was a big deal to go 1,000 miles in basically 48 hours. So that's how I was kind of, I got into all of that, but I didn't even know about technically endurance competitive rides until I read an article, and I believe it was Cycle News, about this thing called the Cal 24. And it was a 24-hour rally run out of Central California. And I signed up for that and rode my first one in 94, 95, and I was hooked ever since.
Cool.
The cool thing was that if you were a finisher on that particular Cal 24, you were invited to this thing called the Bite the Bullet, which was put on by the guys that owned Reno BMW at the time. And I went up and rode that ride out of Gerlach, Nevada. And that was in 96, 95, I guess. No, 93. And I can honestly say, Justin, that from then till now, that was the most fun I've ever had on a motorcycle. Maybe the most fun I've ever had, with my clothes on, so to speak. It was just a blast. And the Cognoscenti group and a few other groups have tried to replicate the fun and the coolness of the Bite the Bullet. And they've come very, very close, but it was kind of like a breakout thing. And, that got me hooked. And then I came back to LA to my friends, and they said, well, you should do the Iron Butt. And I said, okay, well, what's that all about? And they told me, and then it turned out that Fran Crane had to drop out of the upcoming Iron Butt. And at that time, there was no such thing as a wait list. You paid your money, and if you couldn't do the rally, you lost your money. So the only way you could get it back was if you could sell your entry to somebody. So they were really pushing me hard to buy Fran's entry because they wanted to get the money back. And this was only about 4 weeks before the rally. And I said, there's no way. One, I know what it's all about. I can't prepare for it. Two, I've already taken some time off work. I actually had a job at that time. I was no longer self-employed, and I just could not pull it off. But that put the seed in my head, and I knew Ron Major, who had won the 91 Iron Butt Rally. He was a friend of mine. And so I started following the rally. I moved to Colorado right after that. I went out to Salt Lake City in 95 to see the finish of the Iron Butt Rally and met Mike Kneebone and Bob Higdon and some of the other guys. And therefore felt that, okay, this was someplace I needed to be. And I applied for 97 and got in. That was a ride that was didn't work out the way I had hoped, but I DNF'd in that rally halfway through it in second place, heading back to California to all of the roads that I knew and loved, and thought I had that thing in the bag when my bike failed on me near Lubbock, Texas. Came back at 99 on the same motorcycle, rebuilt, on BMW's dime, because at that time they had the unlimited mileage warranty, and managed to win the 99 Iron Butt Rally.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I mean, obviously I was not in LD riding in 1999, but luckily for all of us, the Bob Higdon chronicle of all those events is up on the IBA website.
Exactly. Yep.
And so
Bob lies a lot, though.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll let you take that up with him. But so what I took out of, so basically what I did is reading through 11 days, when I had to do multiple rallies of reading through 11 days. So I'm just searching for George Barnes's name coming up. And in 1999, I see there's a story about you and how your bike was on 3 cylinders and how you figured out that it was the oxygen sensor or something. Tell us about that. How did that work out? And how did you still win the thing only running on 3 cylinders?
Going back 2 years to 97, the reason the bike failed was it melted an intake valve, which according to BMW after the event said is a 1 in a million casting flaw that happened in the factory probably 5 years before the bike was even assembled. It just never heard of. So the 99 event, I pulled off a very aggressive third leg. By the time I got down to, I believe we were in Jacksonville, that's where the checkpoint was, and I was in the lead, and I thought, okay, well, this is pretty cool. And then, funny story, I was standing in Mike Kneebone's hotel room, and Bob Higdon was there, and they handed me we had the bonus pack, and as I always did, I flipped through the bonus pack, and I'm looking for the big numbers. That's the kind of rider I was. I want to know where the big points are. And the first one that caught my eye was White Plains, New York. Well, it clearly we are sitting in Jacksonville, Florida, and if White Plains, New York is the next bonus, but we're going back to the Los Angeles area or Southern California, it's not exactly a direct route.
No, not so much. And
Bob Higdon says to me, well, you can't get up to White Plains, New York and back to LA in like 3 days. And I said, well, I'll do the math and figure it out. And Bob is doing the math himself, and he punches out a number of miles, whatever it was. And I said, well, divide that by 62. And he does. And he came up with a number of hours. And I said, well, sure, it's doable. He goes, well, what's 62? And I go, that's me on a good day. 62 miles an hour all day long. That's with food, gas, sleep, everything.
Yeah.
If that's my number. And he looked at me and shook his head and told me, what he thought of my mental state. And I got on the bike and I went to White Plains, New York. And then I planned on going to Rugby, North Dakota, which was another huge bonus, geographical center of North America. And then there was a bonus down near Lyman, Kansas, which is the geographical center of the U.S.
Yeah.
And if you got them both, you got an extra couple thousand points. So I thought, well, that's it. That's all I'm going to do. Well, as I'm heading across to the bonus in North Dakota, I'm going through Minnesota, I believe, and I pulled off the freeway to get gas, and I had that sinking feeling of a 4-cylinder motorcycle running on 3 cylinders. The exact same feeling I had when I pulled off in Texas 2 years before. And I tell you, my heart sunk. I was extremely upset, but I wasn't willing to give up. So I pulled into an auto parts store because I thought, well, let's check this thing out. And at that point on that K-bike, the K11, I was able to pull the cover off where the spark plugs were. And, well, before that, I realized it was running on 3 cylinders. So I did reach down I took my gloves off and I reached down and I grabbed the header pipes. And this is something I learned in my old dirt bike days. And number 1 was hotter than hell, burnt me pretty good. Number 2 burnt me pretty good. Number 3 burnt me pretty good. But number 4 was not as hot.
You had a 25% chance of picking the right one.
Exactly. Now, in retrospect, when the bike failed 2 years earlier, it was the number 4 cylinder that failed. So maybe I should have started at 4. But without having any reference about how hot it should have been,
Yeah.
I would have still had to go to 3.
Yeah.
So with a few burnt fingers, I went into the store, and they didn't have the Bosch twin tip plugs that BMW, that my bike was running, but they did have a crossover that worked. I bought 2 just in case, and I stuck that thing in, and the thing fired up, and it ran smooth as could be. It was getting terrible gas mileage, which is the result of the O2 sensor having failed and putting it into rich mode. So, but I finished the rally on that. I got pretty dejected by the time I got to Rugby. I was really in bad mood. I'd lost time. I'd been beaten by the wind, and at that time it was legal to call home. And I called my wife, and I asked her to run the numbers on a computer, which she did, and the numbers jive with my numbers. And I said, well, I think I can still do this. And as supportive spouses tend to do, she didn't mince words, and she said, hell yes, you can do it. Now get on their bike and go. Quit complaining.
That's awesome.
So that's how that worked out. But to be honest with you, the 99 win was really a lot of luck. I stopped coming down through Nevada. I knew I had enough time to get in. I had it made. I stopped to get gas. I decided to go in the gas station and grab a hot dog or something. And for whatever reason, I decided to grab my bonus listing and go inside and just take a look at it. And so as I'm flipping through it, I realized that there are 2 more bonuses literally right on the way. State Line, Nevada, we used to call it State Line, and then Baker, California. So I stopped and got those because literally they were within yards of the freeway, right? And it turned out that those 2 bonuses were enough that gave me enough points to beat Rick Morrison, who was hard on my case. So, yeah, it was just it was that close. So.
That's cool. So, this next question is going to require a fairly long setup, so bear with me here. But
sure.
Things changed in 2001, and what I was gonna start this off with was, and it works perfectly into what you're talking about there. You're no stranger to long days, and if you go look up on the IBR site, you will find that George is, in terms of cumulative miles on Iron Butt rallies, he's number 12 overall. For individual rallies, he is number 5, number 7, and number 21, and one of them was the win. One of them was 2001, which we're going to talk about here in a second, because I want to know what the heck happened in 2001 that put you in leg 1 and leg 2 in first place, total mileage for an 82nd place finish of 13,357. And I'm going to read a little bit of what Bob Higdon wrote in the write-up of the day. The first part I'm not going to read verbatim, but it's talking about how you made a similar gamble and elected a more aggressive route going through Denali National Park, and you were hoping that Eric Jewell would go with you, and you'd made it to Prudhoe Bay from Sunnyside, Washington, and had a similar plan for the return. So, okay, we've accounted for the mileage. And then this is the quote. I'm going to just read this paragraph. While awards were distributed, 2 faces were noticed outside the hall. Eric Jewell and George Barnes had arrived. George, still in his Aerostitch, his face covered with road grime, looked very much like cartoon character Wile E. Coyote after a box of Acme Dynamite blew up in his face. Both were roundly applauded for their big ride. It was futile only in points, meaningless only in the final standings. They won the admiration of each person present. George and Eric would always be winners for their effort. What the heck happened?
Well, one of the questions that I don't think has come up in any of your interviews, that maybe should. A lot of people should know this. The Iron Butt Rally costs a lot of money to operate. You've done it, and you're preparing for another one.
$11,000 roughly is a good benchmark.
Well, I cheaped out in '01. I had a few weeks before the rally started. A I discovered I had a crack in the subframe that holds the main fairing on the front fairing.
Oh, wow.
And I talked to my friend Jan up at Reno BMW, and he said, you know, we weld those things up all the time. He goes, you can spend $300 or $400, whatever BMW wants. He goes, but you can weld it back together. Well, I worked at a facility at the time that had a wire feed welder, and although I'm not a welder and don't really think I'm a welder, I thought I could weld it. So I did, and I did not replace it. So on the way from Georgia, or from the start to California, I hit a huge pothole somewhere in Texas, and my weld failed.
Oh.
So I don't know. I don't think Bob Brown would mind me saying this, but I got to Brown's Motor Works in Pomona, where the checkpoint was, and asked Bob if he would be willing to have his tech weld my fairing back together. And he said, "Well, sure, if you take it off the bike." He said, my insurance doesn't allow us to weld on motorcycles with gas tanks, especially gas tanks 6 or 7 inches away from the weld itself." Yeah. And I go, well, that makes sense. He said, but my insurance company doesn't have any control over what happens in the alley behind my shop. So his guy wheeled his little wire feed welder out to the alley, and I cobbled a weld together in the back of behind his shop. Well, by the time the next leg, we went to Devil's Post Pile near Mammoth Lakes, same thing. I hit a major pothole or something, broke it again. So all the way up to Washington, I was fighting it. I got to Washington, and I tried zip tying the thing back up to the bike, and that worked okay until I got into the Yukon territory, and it broke again. So this time I came up. I'm engineering all this stuff while I'm riding, of course, because what else do you have to do?
Yeah,
when
exactly.
So I stopped just north of Watson Lake in Yukon, and I bought some stainless steel hose clamps, a bunch of them, because I knew I was going to have about 8 inches of clamping space. Managed to by holding the fairing with my hand and riding with my throttle hand, I was able to keep up speed. Made it to Fairbanks, where I met Eric Jewell at the Super 8, and we talked about, okay, what are we going to do here? And we had been told that the Dalton Highway was a real mess, especially if it was raining, and it had been raining on us all day. And I told Eric, I said, well, I've got to do some work on my bike. I said, but I'll tell you what, I'll go up and call the Alaska State Road Condition Hotline, whatever they call it, and find out what the deal is. And Eric said, okay, well, I'm going to go across the street to McDonald's and get some food, and I'll ask around in there. I said, okay. So we agreed that, we'd get together later. So I called the road hotline, and I got a recording that said that the road hotline had been suspended as of August 31st, and the new road hotline for winter would be commencing October 1st. So for the month of September, you're pretty much on your own. Right. So I got my BMW Anonymous book out, and I called a place that had some people that had a garage with lights, and I was out of the weather. They let me, I rode my bike over, I pulled it in, and I put these clamps around the frame and the fairing and clamped it back up in place. And I was extremely proud of myself. And the guy was really cool. He told me, he said, when you're done, just hit that button on the wall over there, and the garage door will close, and you'd be on your way. And then he went to bed. So I did that. I hit the button, and I rolled the bike out onto his driveway and put my helmet on, gloves and everything, started up. And when I turned the bike full lock to the left to back it up, the bike died.
Oh.
Well, by now the garage door's closed, and it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning, and I don't want to go to wake this guy up. And I think to myself, how often do you ever go full lock, right? I mean,
yeah,
hardly ever.
In a parking lot, maybe.
Yeah, right. So I can live with that. So I straightened it back up, hit the button, it started right up. So I thought, okay, no problem. Well, on the way up to, so the next morning, Eric and I meet at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and we're going to run the Dalton together. We made this decision. I told him, I said, Eric, the only reason you're here is because you want to win this thing. And the only reason I'm here is because I want to win. I said, but how about we team up, do the ride up and back together. And when we get back down here, we split and go our separate ways and see, let the chips fall where they may. And Eric was just so relieved. He was like, "Oh, I'm so glad you said that." So we take off, and I had a CB on my bike. Eric didn't. So I'm talking to the truckers as I'm running up there, and they're telling me the road conditions, and we're telling stories about the first wave of riders that had gone up a few days earlier and how they were slipping and sliding and falling all over, and how all the truckers thought we were crazy for what we were trying to do.
They're right.
Yeah, they were exactly. So it was fun, and then so at one point we stopped, and Eric says, this dirt stuff's not so bad, and I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, I've never ridden in dirt before, and I'm like, wow, okay. I'm not sure I would have teamed up with you had I known that 6 hours earlier. So he made it all the way up, but at one point I noticed that I went to transfer my fuel, and I have a powered fuel transfer setup system from my back tank to my front tank, and it didn't transfer. So we
that's
stopped.
A problem there.
Yeah, that's a problem. So we got all the way up to up to Prudhoe, had a celebratory dinner. Couldn't finish it because we were both so antsy. We knew we had to get back.
Yeah.
And so we bought a couple souvenirs and jumped on the bikes and turned and headed back down. And I knew I was going to have to deal with this fuel issue at some point. And in the middle of the night, Eric pulls over and he says, I got a great idea. He said, I'm kind of sleepy, so I'm going to take a nap, and you work on your fuel system and wake me up when you're done. And so I did, and I wound up having to run a wire off of the battery back to, I pulled a wire off the fuel pump, and I had them both hanging out the side of my bike. And so when I needed to transfer fuel, I just reached down with my hand and I twist the two wires together, and then the pump would come on and would pump the fuel. So that solved that problem. So we got back to Fairbanks. We split up and went our separate ways. We had passed Bob Hall on the road. He was coming down as we were going up. So we knew Bob had made Prudhoe. And Bob was like 67 points behind me down in Sunnyside. And I'm thinking to myself, well, nobody's coming all the way to Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, and back to Madison, Alabama, to come in second by 67 points.
Yeah.
Bob's going to go get something else. Well, the clincher was Denali National Park was the next biggest bonus on the list. So my feeble mind at the time said, well, go get that one, and then there's nothing he can do. I mean, other than string a whole bunch of them together. And so I went out to Denali fully expecting to see Bob coming the other way, and he never did. And I got to Denali, and the bonus was to get the passport stamp on your paperwork, and they stamped it, and I looked at it, and I said, that's yesterday's date. And she goes, oh, well, we must not have had anybody in here today, so we haven't rolled it over. So, light bulb went off. Okay, Bob didn't come here. So now all I have to do is get back. And I stopped. Big mistake, another learning moment here. I stopped to have a celebratory breakfast. I hadn't really had a normal breakfast in a while, which was fine, except that about an hour to 2 hours later, I started getting drowsy, and I had to stop and take a nap. And then that happened a couple more hours, and I had to stop and take a nap. So then I'm heading on down, and I get to Tok, Alaska. My old K11 was burning some oil, especially when ridden hard. And so I had to add some oil. And I got about 50 miles from Tok, and I started smelling oil fumes, and then realized I had forgotten to put my oil cap back on my engine.
Did you have
so
it still?
Then no, it was gone. I always set it on the passenger peg, so I knew it was gone somewhere. So then I looked around for something to plug it with, and I wasn't successful. And I stopped, I think, in Watson Lake, and I stopped somewhere else. I went looking for a boat plug in a boat shop. I tried cramming a Pepsi bottle in there, an empty Pepsi bottle. And then finally I stopped in the middle of nowhere and walked out in the forest and cut a limb off of a tree with my pocket knife. And I whittled a wooden plug and beat it into the hole with my Maglite flashlight, which worked fantastically. And then when I got down the road further and I got cell phone service, I called Mike, and just to let him know I was just checking in. But I also called the BMW dealer in Edmonton, Alberta, and asked them they were going to be closed when I was going to go through there, asked them to put I paid for an oil cap, and I asked them to put it in the bushes out in front of their shop, and I was going to pick it up on well, it turned out that the the shop in Edmonton was about 45 minutes to an hour out of the way.
Oh.
So I got delayed there again. And then I got lost in Chicago. I got off the freeway in Chicago, again, middle of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning. And I got off and I found a gas station. I made the mistake of asking the kid working the gas station what the quickest way back to the interstate was. And I believed him. Well, I got back to the interstate, but I was on the wrong interstate going the wrong direction. So that took me a while to get sorted out. And then I got stopped heading into Madison, Wisconsin, that road between Milwaukee and Madison. It was raining really hard, and it was nighttime. And the police officer said I didn't have a taillight. He said if it wasn't for that reflective strip on the back of my arrow stitch, nobody would see me. He said, so I'll call a wrecker. We'll get your bike towed in. And I said, no, that's not happening. I said, I have a taillight bulb. So I swapped out the taillight bulb. Well, that didn't help. And so he gets out of his car. He comes back. He goes, okay, well, that didn't work. So I'm going to call the wrecker. I go, no, I got tricks up my sleeve here, man. So I took another piece of wire off of that wire that I had for my fuel pump, and I ran it through that little hole in the end of the light bulb, and voila, I had a taillight.
Huh.
And I also was able to plug the socket in, so I have my brake light too. So he gets out of his car and he says, okay, you've got tail lights. How about brake lights? So I put on my brakes. That works. Okay, that's good. And he goes, well, while I've got you pulled over here, I really need to see your driver's license, proof of insurance, and registration. And I'm like, well, you could have asked for that 40 minutes ago while you've been sitting in your warm car, but he didn't. So that took him another 20 minutes to run me or something. And so then I took off and headed down. And later I found out that when you run a BMW K1100 LT without an oil cap, the oil fumes tend to just get up behind the fairing and kind of cause this mist that just blows around. And that attaches to your face, except where you have your sunglasses. So you look kind of funky, actually. But I didn't know I looked funky. But I did notice that, one, a police officer really thought I was doing something wrong. Two, I stopped at one gas station, and the guy walked up and flipped the sign from open to close as I was getting to the door. And so that's what that was all about. It was riding for I don't know how many miles, probably well over 100, maybe 200, between all the different things I tried to do with that oil cap issue. And it just was I lost 30 to 45 minutes to more about 4 different times or 5 different times on the way down. So
yeah, that's tough to overcome on the last couple of
any
days.
2 of those. Well, I was running an old-fashioned GPS that did not do turn-to-turn routing. So once I turned onto, I-75 heading south towards Madison, now I had a pretty much straight shot. And now the GPS was relatively accurate, and it told me that I had to average, I did the math, I had to average 92 miles an hour. And since I was on an interstate and I think I was going to be going through Knoxville and Indianapolis, I just knew that just wasn't anything that was going to happen. I don't ride that fast, and it would have been ridiculous. So I pulled over and called in, and they tried to convince me. They said, "Man, there's a grace period." I said, "Yeah, I've factored all that in." I said, "It's just not going to happen." So I took a nap, and then when I felt refreshed a little bit, and to this day, I mean, I did not know when I walked into that hotel what I looked like. But once I got up to my room and saw myself in a mirror, then I realized all those things that had happened along the way, the people that acted really weird when they saw me. Now I understood.
So were the rules different back then? Where it just like the penalty points just kept accruing? Is that how you were able to actually be a finisher? How did
the reason I was able to be a finisher was because they basically said if you went to Prudhoe Bay, you didn't have to go to Madison. It had to do with that. There was technically I had done Prudhoe, I'd gotten back to the checkpoint or back to the finish, hadn't gotten back on time, but because they changed the things around due to the not happen to go to all of the checkpoints.
I gotcha.
Yeah, so it was kind of a technicality, I guess, but they awarded it to me, and then when I found out,
I'd say you earned it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I found out, Ira Eggins came out to me later in the day and showed me the mileage. And ironically, I had done 11 more miles than I had done in 99. And
which
so I
by
told,
which by the
what's
way
that?
set the record for the most number of miles in an Iron Butt rally at that point.
Right at that time. And it held for about 10 years. But I told Mike, I said, I don't care what you say, but I know that I rode the hardest 82nd place finish
Ever.
ever.
So one of the questions I've been really interested in asking you was, I mean, you did your kind of stint in the Iron Butt rally was kind of through, I think your last one was 2009. So you were really in the kind of what I would call the infancy of turn by turn GPS and kind of the online routing. How do you think? Have you done a rally since then where you've been able to route on the clock with turn by turn? And how do you think you'd fare in a or enjoy for that matter the kind of the current way the rallies run, where it's less thinking while you're riding and more doing the thinking ahead of time and just following
Right.
the route?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it, and I have probably a different attitude than some people, but you're right. I was through that whole progression, and eventually it became a point where you had to be better with computers than you had to be, well, not with writing. You always have to be good with writing.
Mm-hmm.
I even told Mike years ago, I said, you shouldn't even let anybody into this thing if they don't have at least 100,000 miles under their butt. I mean, you got to be a good rider, for a number of reasons that we could talk about forever. But I wasn't as good and as fast at the computer work, now, so I was there when they gave us the bonuses on a thumb drive. I was able to get the thumb drive into the computer, get the files open, get them transferred into, at that time I was using Streets and Trips.
Mm-hmm.
But then I wasn't good at that whole thing of, assigning them different colors of flags and shapes of flags. And this is a 4 hour and this is an 8 hour. And so I took myself out of the game because of that. Now, that all being said, I have a friend, Terry Lehman, who lives near me here. And Terry used to work for Microsoft. He's a computer guy. And at one point in 2014, I think he said 13 maybe, he said, if you ever want to do the rally again, I can teach you the computer stuff.
Yeah.
And so I took him up on that, and I entered the 2015 rally. I sent in my application, and I got drawn. And I put together a spreadsheet, I got drawn in January. So by June, I want to be doing this. I want to be doing 1,000 miles every week. I want to get my body in shape. I want to be doing X number of hours of practice on the computer. And by September, I need to do this. And by October, by the time December came around, or January, when the next payment was due, I hadn't done any of that. And I realized that, I don't have it in me any longer to do what it takes to be competitive in this event. And I know, even though I don't know who they are by name, I know there are people out there, one of them might be a guy named Justin, that has what it takes to win this thing. And I don't want to take a spot away from a guy that really has that deep down desire to do it. If you want to excel in anything in life, you've got to have a passion for it. And my passion is still there for riding. Take me back to a 97 or a 99 Iron Butt rally bonus pack, and I'll knock the socks off anyone.
Yeah.
But make me use a computer, it just took it out of me. And watching what Jim Owens did, I remember I was sitting in my hotel room in 99 after they'd given us the bonus pack. 20 minutes after they'd given us the pack, and I heard Jim's bike start up, and I had barely anything over to a file, and Jim's taken off. Well, Jim knew that he had to get to northern Colorado that day, and then he did his routing on the way as he did it. And I was out of the game, mentally and skill set wise. So
yeah. It seems to me it's like the best description I can come. It's almost like a biathlon where you got the skiing and the shooting, where they're two very different things, but you got to be good at both of them to be able to succeed. And I mean, you almost can't. I mean, you would probably have a better thought on or better view on this, but it's almost like you can't compare the rally now to the rally in the early 2000s. It's just two completely different things.
Yeah, I agree. And then, much to their credit, Mike and Lisa started to introduce the rest bonuses, the daylight only bonuses. I mean, so many daylight only bonuses. It introduces a level of complexity to your routing that was never there before.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be, wow, I'm going to have to ride through the night to get that. Well, okay, fine. That's what my big ass lights are for.
Yeah.
That's no problem. Just let me go. But now I have to not ride through the night. I got to stop and wait and then go get that thing just as the sun comes up.
Yep.
That kind of thing. So,
yeah. All right. Well, see, I promised you before we started the interview this would go quick, and it has.
Yeah.
So we're about 40 minutes right now, so I'm going to go ahead and start in on the LD dozen here, because as you know, as a listener of this podcast, we end each interview with the same series of 12 questions, and the first question is, what was your first motorcycle and why? And I think you kind of already answered that.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that was that Cushman. It was a 2-speed. And you had to come to a complete stop to switch it into high gear. And my dad bought it and stuck me on it. Funny thing, the very first time I rode it, we were outside of L.A. in a little town called Palmdale, and he got on the back and he said, okay, go up this road. And I went up this road, and we got to a certain spot. And he said, okay, make a big turn. And I made a big turn, went back down the road, and then made another big turn. And he said, okay, do it again. So I headed up, and I got to the same point where he told me to turn before. And I said, should I turn? And he didn't answer me. And I asked him again, should I turn? And he didn't answer me. So I turned around enough to know that he wasn't on the bike anymore. He had stepped off back at the truck. And in me looking around for him and now panicking because he was no longer with me, I managed to run into a rut, and the thing died, and I couldn't get it started. So I had to listen to my dad laugh his way all the way up the hill to come back up and start it for me. So that was my first bike, and I bought it just because my dad was a motorcycle fanatic, and he thought I should learn. So.
That's cool. Where did you take your first overnight ride?
Oh, that was easy. I was my family had moved from the June Lake or Bishop area in California back down to Los Angeles when I was in high school, and I had traded up to a Honda 350, and a friend of mine up in Bishop asked me to come up, and so I rode from LA up to Bishop on that Honda 350 and then back. We spent a couple of days with him. So it was just shy of 300 miles each way. And I remember the road going back down. The wind was blowing really hard. Sand was blowing. Didn't have any kind of windshield or anything. This was just a straight little Honda 350. And I had to adjust the chain a couple times because it got so loose, and the oil looked like water. It was so hot. And I got back, and my dad asked me, he said, so how'd the ride go? And I told him all this time, I'm complaining. I said, God, the wind was killing me. The sand was killing me. I thought the trucks were going to blow me off the road. And I get done with my big tirade, and he says, so I just have one question. He said, would you do it again? And I stopped, and I said, yeah, tomorrow. And he goes, okay. He goes, you're hooked. Never mind. So that was my first of many, many overnights. Yeah.
Nice. All right, question number 3. What is or was your day job? What pays for LD riding?
Right now, what pays for my riding, I'm a chief engineer of a luxury hotel. Now, back when I was in my infancy in this sport, I had my own business. I was a hardwood flooring contractor. But that was tough back then because I wasn't the kind of contractor that could leave for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and the money would still keep coming. And I kind of had to be there. But yeah.
All right, question number 4. What is your favorite non-motorcycling hobby?
Wow. You think I'd be prepared for this? I've listened to your interviews before. I've started to enjoy shooting with guns again lately. My dad, being a police officer, I learned to shoot when I was about 9 or 10 years old. So I've started to enjoy that. Over the years, I've loved photography. I love travel. Not even on just a motorcycle. I love travel. Although I can say I've ridden a motorcycle in all 50 states, so that's something I'm kind of proud of. And not always on the iron, but obviously. But yeah.
All right. Question number 5. What is your favorite road?
That's a tough one, and I think everybody has a different answer. I know that when you talk to George Sweatland, he was talking about Highway 89 because it's literally right out his back door. I mean, I remember I listened to that. Thought, man, that's an easy one, George. How'd you, now, I rode that road last fall. I wanted to go over into Yosemite because I hadn't ridden 120 in a long time, but I did not know that because of COVID they required a reservation to get into Yosemite, so they wouldn't let me go in. I told them, I said, I'm just going through, man. I'm not even going to stop. I won't even put my feet down. And that didn't work. So I went back up and rode over 89, over to Sonora, and then up to Angel Camp and over 4 Ebbets Pass. Fantastic road, love it. So I think everybody's going to say that a road that they can ride regularly is probably that they like, is their favorite. I got to tell you, the road from Valdez, Alaska, back over to Tok Junction across Alaska is just absolutely fantastic. When you look at the Wrangell Elias glaciers and the mountains up there, it's just fantastic. But then again, I've been coming across Nebraska when the sun comes up on an iron button. Thought that was a great road. So it's tough. A short-term road right up north of us, Stevens Pass. That's a fun road. And then over Blewett Pass back down. It all depends on how much time I have, I guess.
Blewett Pass is a lot more fun on a motorcycle than it is in a car. I can tell you that.
It sure is, yeah.
It's somewhat frightening in a car. So, as you were talking there, I was thinking, an idea, it probably would be it would be like one episode, but the excuses or the things that motorcycle riders try to get through something that somebody is telling them they can't do. Like you're saying, I'm not going to put my feet down. I mean, there's every one of these interviews, there's some story about someone like, oh, I'm just going to go do this. Can I just go through there? I'm on a motorcycle. See, it's okay. All right. So question number 6, what is your least favorite road?
Well, again, that's an interesting one too, because it's easy to say any interstate. I think that's a cop out. But my least now is my least favorite, because if you'd have asked me this 20 years ago, I would have told you it was my best favorite, most favorite. There is a road in California that cuts from the 101, goes over to a little town called Honeydew. It goes through a redwood forest that is just an incredible. The road is only about 20 feet wide. You have to have your headlights on and your sunglasses off because the trees make it so dark even in the middle of the day. It's just fantastic. And then when you get to the little town of Honeydew, it's cool. You head out this road called Mattole Road, and you pop over this little ridge, and there's the Pacific Ocean laid out in front of you. It's called the Lost Coast Highway. It is just fantastic. Trouble is they haven't touched the damn road in 20 years, and it is now 50, 60 miles of the worst potholes imaginable. And it is. I took my son over it a couple years ago because I wanted to show him all the really cool roads in Northern California. And God, it beat us to death. Wow! So that is Mattole Road and Lost Coast Highway is now my least favorite road. Mainly because if it was maintained, it would be everybody's most favorite.
Yeah, I'm looking at it, and boy, that looks fun.
Yeah,
there's a lot of switchbacks there.
Yeah, it is cool, and it's like I said, I rode it the first time on the Cal 24. And we broke out onto the ocean, and the sun was sitting out over the Pacific, and it was just incredibly. I mean, I don't know if motorcyclists are allowed to say that it was a beautiful view. I mean, does that take the macho-ness out of it? I don't know. But, man, it was just awesome. And when I rode it with my son a couple years ago, I was pushing and pushing to try to get there exactly at that time. Turned out the road was so bad that we didn't make it. When we broke out over it, the sun was setting on below the horizon, and we didn't get the impact. But great road.
Let's see. Okay, so question number 7. You've kind of answered this already. This is the base camp, streets and trips, or paper maps question. But I'm curious now, when you're not doing rallies anymore, but you're still riding your bike. What are you using to navigate?
To be honest, if I'm just going someplace that I've never been, I'll still use. I just plug it into Garmin,
Yeah.
and or Waze. Waze is certainly has its advantages, I think, especially letting you know about certain traffic issues and things like that. I do when I sit around and fantasize about rides, I'll use Google Maps or some of the other mapping programs, but I don't actually download them into a GPS. I generally, I'm still old school. I'll write out my waypoints where I want to hit, and then I'll plug those into the GPS. Unless I try to make I try to understand, put them close enough to where I'm going to get the roads I want to go, and not let Garmin figure out what it wants to do.
I wouldn't call that old school. I do that. I mean, they're going in the GPS, but they are going on a piece of paper
right.
that I can.
Exactly.
If everything else has died, that piece of paper will still be there. So, all right. Question number 8: if you get a new motorcycle tomorrow, what's the first Farkle you're going to put on it?
God, a couple of years ago, I would have said lights. I got into an argument with a guy on the IBR or the IB done list a few years ago. He said that the most important accessory was a fuel cell, and I said, no. And this guy lived in Oregon at the time. I said, if you can't see that deer, you may hit that deer. And he said, well, I don't care how many lights you have. If you're sitting on the side of the road because you ran out of gas, it doesn't do you any good. And I said, well, I don't care how much gas you have. If you're dead on the side of the road because you hit a deer, it doesn't do any. But
I would also make the argument that regardless of how much gas you carry, you still need to plan where you're getting that gas.
Right. But nowadays, the lights on new motorcycles are so incredible that I mean, I would probably still add a set of conspicuity lights, lights so other people see me. I'm a firm believer in those, but I don't know that I would need them for visual, seeing down the road. However, I've run with a fuel cell now for over 300,000 miles. I don't know if I could adjust my riding style to stopping every 160 to 200 miles to get fuel. I love the ability to go close to 400, on a long ride.
That was really, when I got my Goldwing, that was really kind of a culture shock, I would almost say, for me. It's like, it just seems like I'm stopping for fuel all the time. And it wasn't, before I got the new seat, it wasn't that big a deal because like, I need to get off the bike. But at the same time, it's like, it just seems like, you just get so used to, it's not like you're running the thing empty all the time, but you're going 300 miles. It's a
sure.
5-6 hours, and you don't have to get fuel. And if you go through Oregon, you don't have to stop and have someone else pump your fuel. Not that I'm bitter, and not that I plan my rides around not getting gas in Oregon.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, the other thing I was on the Goldwing, I would say it has amazing stock headlights. They are very very good. But man, those Clearwaters really light up the night still. I'll still take them. So, all right, question number 9. You've mentioned this a couple times. You still have that BMW? Is that your current bike?
I do not have that BMW. Unfortunately, that BMW met its demise in a fire at my house in Colorado.
Oh, no.
So, yeah. So I purchased Yeah, it still is. I purchased a K1200 LT. Okay. So I had a 100 LT, a 1100 LT, a K1200 LT. That one met its demise when I hit a bridge covered with ice still in Colorado when I lived there. Figured I probably hit the ground at about 70, and they totaled the bike. And so now I'm on an 06 K1200 LT. And, I would love one of the new GTLs. I've ridden them a lot. But to be honest, when I get out on the road, out of town on a trip, my 01 LT just works for me. It takes a couple years to get a bike set up the way you want it. It just works, and I just enjoy it so much, and I know everything about it. If I break down on the side of the road, short of not having an O2 sensor with me, I could probably get the damn thing fixed and go on again. But I just love it, and I haven't felt the burning desire to bite the bullet and buy what is now an over $30,000 motorcycle.
Yeah, that's You can buy a lot of accessories to make that older BMW for the price for $30,000.
No, I know that I can buy one that I could buy one that's a couple years old that still has a warranty, so I could buy an extended and get it for much less, and I could fit it into my budget. That's never a doubt. But like I said, this bike still works for me. So.
Exactly. All right, question number 10. Who made the seat on that BMW?
Rich's in Kingston, Washington.
You have a Rich's butt.
I love Rich's. I had it. Yeah, right. I had him. Funny story. I was living in Colorado when I went to Rich's the first time. I did the 1,200 miles out to his shop in about 15 hours, and I stopped it was on a Friday, and I stopped to make sure I knew where he was, and then went over to my cousins who lived in the area and spent the night, and then came in the next morning, and I got there as soon as he opened the door. Mm-hmm. And all day long, Rich was just telling everybody, yeah, this guy does the iron butt, and this guy does this, and lo and behold, I was the last bike done at the end of the day. And Rich had asked me at some point, he goes, so what's your plans? I go, well, if you get it done early enough, I'm going to start heading home. But I said, if you don't, I don't want to stay at my cousin's tonight, but I'll find someplace. And so lo and behold, it was the last bike done. And he goes, my wife's out of town. And he goes, we got a bunch of leftovers from a party we had last night. Why don't you come and spend the night at my place? And I said, sure, whatever. So we took off from his shop, and we got out to take a ferry across to Kingston. And when we got on the ferry, there's 4 other guys there. You know how the ferries are, right? We all pull up to the front of the ferry, and these 3 or 4 other guys pull up. And he's like, yeah, this is the guy I was telling you about. This is the guy I was telling you about. So then we go over and we buy some steaks, and we go stop at this little microbrewery place. And there's these other guys there. There's bikes out front. He goes, yeah, that's the guy I'm telling you about, So anyway, Rich and I we went home, went to his house and barbecued a steak and had a great night. And
nice.
But that's not why I have Rich's seats. I have Rich's seats because I had a Russell Daylong that didn't work well for me. I had a custom seat on my Guzzi years before, but that guy died, therefore went out of business. But yeah, so Rich is the man for me. So
cool. All right. Question number 11. What is your favorite or the most interesting location you visited on your motorcycle?
Favorite or most interesting? Alaska has to be way up there.
Yeah.
Alaska is, to go to Prudhoe Bay is phenomenal, except that Dead Horse, Alaska is a crappy town. To try to build a town that far north that's going to survive the winters and everything, it's just a bunch of looks like metal shipping containers all crammed together, and it's not a pleasant place. But Alaska in general, just the scenery and the wide openness. I stopped again on the 01 Iron Butt. One of the reasons I might have not done as well as I could have is I stopped to take pictures of grizzly bears and moose and things like that. And like I said, I think, but I lived in Colorado for 15 years, so I could tell you a whole lot of places in Colorado that are fantastic as well.
All right, last question. How do you pass the time on a long ride? I'm guessing you're not a big audiobook or you're not listening to music. I'm just going to guess you're watching the flowers go by.
No. I listen to music. I've got 1,000 songs on my Spotify list, and I listen to your podcast. I listen to some other podcasts. So one funny story, if we got a minute here, when I was coming back on the 01 and I'd lost my oil plug, I started engineering a holder for my oil plug, because I'd done this once before. I'd lost an oil plug on a previous bike, or might have even been that bike. So I decided, what it was shaped like, what kind of steel. It had to have a certain spring tension, and I was going to rivet it to my back saddlebag. So when I took it off the engine, I just slop it into that thing, and it'd be perfect, and it'd be there. If I forgot to put it in, I spent 2 hours engineering this thing, right? I figured out what size rivets I was going to use, and what type of stainless steel I needed to use for it. And then it dawned on me that the last time I lost an oil plug, they were $1.49 at the BMW dealer. And
just buy like 5.
Exactly. Why not just buy a couple, right? And so then I laughed at myself for the next 2 hours, I think. So that whole process, managed to keep me awake and alert for probably 4 or 5 hours. But yeah, I like to listen to music and podcasts. And back in the day when I was doing the Iron Butt and had a CB radio, the middle of the night truckers are the greatest entertainment you can come across. I mean, some of those guys are just hilarious. So, that's it.
You have finished the LD dozen. Anything else you want to talk about before I let you go?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I just, like I said, I encourage people to get involved with this sport because you meet the greatest people.
Yeah.
And one thing I have told people almost all my life, because I've been doing this for so darn long, there's those guys out there that, well, I don't see why I need to sign up and do a rally and have people tell me where to go. And well, if you sign up and do an organized rally and have people tell you where to go, you'll go on roads you'll never find on your own. And so many times I've gone back, sometimes with my family in a car, and said, man, I got to show you this. This was a bonus on the Iron Butt, but man, you got to come and see this, because you'll never find these things unless you maybe go join a club in that area. But, you can't join a club in every area. So it's definitely worth it.
Well, everyone, that is George Barnes. He is the winner of the 1999 Iron Butt, an 82nd place finisher and the hardest 82nd place finish in Iron Butt history in the 2001 Iron Butt Rally. George, thank you for coming on Long Riders Radio.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, if you'd like to get in contact with me, there's lots of ways you can do it. Easiest way is to head over to that website, www.longridersradio.com. And once again, we need to thank the folks over at DiscountRamps.com for their support on this episode. DiscountRamps.com offers a huge selection of power sports products for your ATV, UTV, motorcycle, and more. Long Riders Radio listeners can save 15% on their order by using coupon code LONG, that's LONG, over at DiscountRamps.com. And for this episode, we need to thank Patreon contributor Daniel Parks. I hadn't heard from Mike in a couple days, so I called Daniel, and he rode over to Mike's house just to make sure everything was okay. And when Daniel called me back, well, take a listen to Daniel's description of Mike's place.
Just a bunch of metal, looks like metal shipping containers all crammed together, and it's not a pleasant place.
Ride safe, everyone.